Hi there guys, my name is Braithwaite. I'm the Technical Specialist at Wolfram Research Europe, and today I'll be presenting the CloudConnector for Excel. Good afternoon everybody, my name is Braithwaite. I am a Technical Specialist at Wolfram Research Europe, so I'm based in the UK. The reason I'm telling you this before I start is because my job, essentially, is to find all our interesting new technologies, learn as much as I can about them, and then present them in talks such as this. So CloudConnector was the next interesting technology I found that I wanted to present to you guys. So to start with, what actually is CloudConnector? So this is quickly a brief summary of what I'm going to go through. I'm going to go through what is it, show you some live coding examples, go through the most recent updates and why they're important, and then some further examples should I have the time. So as I said to start with, the most important thing is, what is it? Specifically, it's a plugin for Excel that allows you to access the Wolfram language from directly within a Excel workbook. This is actually quite important because it obviously extends Excel's capabilities beyond what you normally would have, just by adding in the capabilities of the Wolfram language. Interestingly enough, it works on both our public and private Wolfram clouds, which is a hint about one of the updates I'm going to mention later. And it also allows server-based computations from within Excel, allowing you to access more power than you may possibly have on your local machine, if that is required. So, some further information can be found, should you wish for it, at the Wolfram CloudConnector website, telling you much more than what I will include here, including more information on the Wolfram Enterprise Private Cloud, in case that is particularly relevant for yourselves. And just in case that is not enough, there is indeed an extensive set of resources, including documentation and everything, just like pretty much every Wolfram product you will get your hands on. Lovely, extensive documentation. And most importantly would be the ability for the install and use section, giving you absolutely all the information you could need on adding it into Excel, setting it up appropriately, creating your own APIs, more on that in a minute, and its actual use from within a workbook, including a large troubleshooting section just in case. Very happy with that. So this is the bit where actually I get the most nervous about, the live coding. So one of the key things about the Wolfram CloudConnector for Excel that I wish to stress to start with is that I mentioned APIs earlier. I will admit, not everyone, probably pretty much everybody here, would be a Wolfram expert in terms of the Wolfram language and their coding, in which case you don't necessarily need an API to get started. As I said, this is the nervous bit. So here I have my standard Excel spreadsheet. Nothing particularly interesting about it so far, apart from this lovely Wolfram tab, which I'm just going to sign into. So that's me connected up, or should be connected up when I get my password right, to our public cloud, allowing me to do remote computations. So normally, you would quite happily sit there and do 2 + 2 in Excel. Nice and simple. Using the CloudConnector for Excel, I can do the same thing remotely and achieve the same result. So far, not necessarily very impressive. Another thing that I've discovered how to do in Excel in my half-an-hour tutorial would be generating random numbers. Interesting thing is, obviously that's a single random number. Again, something you can quite easily, with your knowledge of the language, do in Excel like so. So again, oh, I've been given 0. Fair enough. Again, similarities between the two, but accessing the Wolfram language from within Excel. This is the bit where I believe it gets interesting. So you've just seen the use of the rand function. He says, try and remember how to use Excel. and you get a single number, right? It's only a single number, though. And in order to then generate loads of those, I can imagine there's some Excel enthusiasts who will tell me off for that, but I would sit there and drag that out. That's kind of a boring manual task. One of the things you'll remember if you're from the Wolfram language, though, is actually the ability to generate multiple random numbers. So I'm just going to grab that straight up, put it into a new cell, and instead generate, 100 is probably going to be interesting, 10 random numbers, he says, realizing that he's forgotten something. Mental check.
You want to put the range of the 10, 10.
That's it. Thank you. And I get 10 random numbers without having to sit there and drag that out. It's an API call, I will admit, but allows you to generate numbers quite quickly. One thing that I will admit that I have found very, very hard to do in Excel would be the addition of currencies. Adding currencies together. Have I gone off mic? Whoa, apparently so. Okay, so normally, in order to do the addition of currencies in Excel, you would have to sit there, manually find your exchange rates, and put it all in. So we'll do £12. I'd need the exchange rate, and then how many dollars. Then I'd have to sit there and go, well, okay, that needs to be 12 plus that cell times that cell. And I don't know about you guys. You need to make sure your exchange rate's there. You need to make sure it's up to date, that kind of thing. We all know the Wolfram language can do that all automatically. It will find the current exchange rate for you, and it will quite happily sit there and do all those calculations. As I mentioned, let's do that from within Excel. He says, so quantity. Quantity takes 2 arguments. So the first one is going to be the number. And this is where it gets interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great British pounds. So not the most exciting thing in the world. Then I've got to add that to the quantity of the relevant amount of dollars. As you can see, it's not the prettiest of code, but that's because of Excel, so nothing I can do about that one. US dollars. But the important thing is, once you've done this once, obviously you can copy and paste, like we'd all expect. And then we have that. Nope, thanks for the catch. Told you it's nerve-wracking doing live coding. Plus the other quantity. Finish that off. Then we can pick our 2 cells. So the first one and then the second one. And then run that. So this obviously is going over to Wolfram Alpha, finding the exchange rate, and quite happily pulling that information through. So I don't have to worry about making sure the exchange rate in my own workbook is up to date, and I can pull information remotely from the web as well, all within one simple little call. Something I will admit I take for granted when I'm trying to do this in an actual notebook back at the office. That's just a few quick live demonstrations on some of the things we can do. I say quick, but hey. So one of the features of the ability to call any functionality from the Wolfram language in Excel is the fact that it has to be a pure function that you actually call. A function, sorry. Just a function. And obviously 2 plus 2 itself is not actually a function. You'd actually have to put plus of 2 plus 2, plus of 2, comma 2. And then in order for the, is it parser?
Right, it just makes it into a function.
In order to accept it, it then needs the ampersand at the end. Which I'll show you later. So some of the most recent updates which we want to bring to your attention is the fact that this is now up for preview release. You can quite happily download it and have a go with it yourself. Most importantly, we now have our public cloud use as well. So you no longer need an EPC in order to access this. As you saw, I just connected to our regular open cloud, signed in, free account, nothing special, and I can quite happily get there and use the Excel connector, Cloud Connector for Excel. As I've tried to mention and demonstrated a little bit, you can evaluate absolutely any Wolfram expression whatsoever. There are some very good examples on that coming up. And also, you have the ability for authentication. So because you were calling APIs, the Wolfram system allows you to specify that those APIs need to have an authenticated Wolfram account, which means you can then set it to either specific users or just anybody who has a Wolfram ID. So you can deploy your API and only certain individuals can then access it. So one of the slightly more prepared examples would be the use of temporal data. So one of the brilliant things about this Cloud Connector is that it does actually pass more than just the numerical value back in a lot of cases. It does actually pass back information such as the fact that it's a date, so formatted as a date. So instead of coming up with some clever way of deciding what it is I'm attempting to do, that's date range, sorry. So I'm just going to create a series of dates with a bit of Wolfram code, which I'm used to using all the time, as opposed to having to figure out how to do this in. I'm just going to choose 3 for now. Close that one, and reset finish. And I'll get it to, it's my fault, I've taken too long. Just quickly sign out and sign back in again. Built-in timeout that I can't do anything with. And I can generate a series of dates today and the next 3 days. As you can see, it's formatted it appropriately to a date. In this case, thankfully, it has recognized that I am from the UK, so it's put the day first as well, which is quite useful for me. If I particularly want to, I can then set it so that it will happily accept a date, a number from within the notebook. And I can press enter and it will continue. And now I can just edit this 3 and convert it to 10 and so on and so forth, and it'll update appropriately. If I wanted to, I could choose 100, and it's a single API call as opposed to many or several calculations, which really does help. And as you can see, it's automatically adapting to exactly what I've asked it for. I'm not having to specify how much space you can or can't use or anything like that. It's automatically done all the formatting for me. One of the things that I have kind of sidestepped from was the mention of APIs. I will admit there are going to be users who are brilliant at Excel and can do all sorts of amazing stuff, but might not necessarily be so versed in the Wolfram language coding. That's where the ability to set up APIs comes in, because you can set up your own API, hide all the lovely, amazing coding in the background so that these people don't have to sit there and try to read it and understand it. And they can call it more simply from within Excel without having to worry about all that kind of Wolfram coding. So let's see if this will go according to plan. Okay. So simply, I'd need a cloud deploy of an API function. Helps if I remember to type it in properly. Then all I need to do is figure out exactly what I'm attempting to do here in terms of the temporal data. So I'm going to recreate what I've just shown you on screen using the Wolfram ability, if I can remember what the code is for it. So I need to tell it what I'm looking for. So I will admit I have forgotten my code, so I'm going to use my little cheat here. Go back to where I started. So all I need to do is tell it what it's looking for, which in this case is a bit of data from within the Excel spreadsheet. So in this case, it's not a repeating element. In this case, it's just going to be a single number. When it accepts that number, I need to tell it what to do with it. So in this case, I was doing the date range. I'm going to save you guys watching me type that out. Come on. By heading back over to here, grab that piece of coding, paste it straight in here. So I've extracted all that information that normally people would have to, the Excel users would have to know. Set it up in my API function. I want permissions to go to public so that anybody here could use it if they so choose. And then I can deploy that. So I've deployed my API. Not the best idea, I must admit. Let's give it a name so I can find it easier. We'll call it WTC CloudConnector for Excel 2018. So I now have my API, which I've gone and stored in the public cloud, which is public use to anybody. You guys could all sit there and use that right now if you so wish. It's entirely up to you. And I'm going to do the exact same thing just by doing equals Wolfram API. You then need the name of the API, which I left in my notebook. Yep. So I did name it correctly. So it's WTC CloudConnector for Excel 2018. So I then need a parameter. Just going to grab that quickly. My spelling is atrocious when I get nervous. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Cool. And that parameter, forgot this is Excel, is that cell there. Helps if I click in the right place. That parameter is there. I forgot the syntax data. There we go. API cannot be found. I'll put an extra C in it. See, that is why you double check everything. What have I missed? Parameter data, whatever. Have I set my API up wrong? Yeah, that's my fault. So something in my API that I created myself is incorrect. Data goes to number, date range to day plus. Okay. But the idea is that, as you can see from the Excel spreadsheet itself, that is a lot easier for people to type in when it comes to using the Excel workbook. And can hide quite a lot of interesting complex coding, which pretty much anybody can then get access to. All they need to know is what they're passing in as each individual little bit, which quite easily try and pass over to some individual without them having to know the Wolfram language coding, and they can access that API however you so choose, remembering the authenticated bit, or in this case, as I showed you, public. My next example is a bit more interesting. So here I have an example data set that I have found on a free information sharing website. And I can quite happily show you that there are some things, such as financial prediction, which I find the Wolfram language does a bit better than I can possibly manage in Excel, because I already have my knowledge of the Wolfram language. So large spreadsheet of data, quite a bit of computational power required, but thankfully head over to the Wolfram Cloud, and I can get a lovely financial plot, including prediction, which is absolutely tiny, which you can't see, which is this lovely little orange speck just there, which is a financial prediction of what should continue in terms of this company's particular profits over a period of time. I don't know if you spotted, but that coding was, again, interesting. Mostly due to the syntax required by Excel. But this time, more successfully, I already have an API I deployed earlier, which I can call to do the exact same thing, again, with after abstracting and hiding all the complicated coding, which we know is not actually that complicated, but still. That's not my API. There we go. And very imaginatively, I've called it something very similar. Which will then do, again, in this case, there is a significantly larger amount of data going into it, but will do the same financial prediction using the Wolfram engine, which I know for a fact is actually quite difficult to set up and program within Excel, set up all your different parameters, all that kind of thing, and have quite a lot of interesting things going on, whereas the Wolfram language can actually do it in a very short and simple line of code. So just to quickly recap, you can run any Wolfram language expression whatsoever from within Excel using the CloudConnector. You can use simple functions, the Wolfram and the Wolfram API function, in order to call the Wolfram language from a cloud source into your workbook. You can either use the Wolfram language expressions, which you all know how to use, or you can make it even simpler on a non-Wolfram expert to use that same functionality through the use of APIs. And also, you can authenticate those APIs so that only individual certain users can use them by logging in first. Thank you very much for listening. Do we have any questions?